This is the Frontline Focus podcast, a show dedicated to those in the field on project sites, focusing on their development as the key to the construction industry's progress. This is Season 2. Our focus will be on shifting from a focus on compliance to building a positive culture. In each episode, we will talk with a construction industry professional to hear their thoughts on how to shift the frontline focus. All right. Apparently, some people listened to our first season and kind of liked what we were doing. So, we're going to start off Season 2 right now. This will be our first episode, and I've got an awesome human with us today, Philip Greisen from ProSafe Solutions. We're going to talk about some interesting ways of thinking about the human mind side of safety. Philip, how you doing this morning, sir?
I'm wonderful. How are you?
I'm good, dude. It's awesome to see you and catch up and talk about some new things. And along for the ride, my tag team partner, Gabe Guetta. How are you doing, sir?
Rob, it's a wonderful morning. A little wet in Vancouver, as usual in the winter, but it's a good day today. I'm excited for the conversation.
Absolutely. You know, when you get like minds together and we talk about bettering things, which is really what we're trying to do with safety across the board in the construction industry specifically. Three great minds. I think we'll come up with some good nuggets of wisdom to share with people. So it should be a good talk.
Yeah. Rob, I feel like you know almost everyone in the US around safety and stuff like that. The more people I meet, the more people that know who you are. But Philip and you actually, was he the first one you met or pretty close to when it comes into the safety community? Or how does that, I know you guys know each other. I heard a little bit of the backstory offline, but I'd love for everyone to hear a little bit more about that because you were pretty young when you came into the industry, right?
You know, when you spend, let's just say 2 decades in an industry and travel around a lot, you meet some people. And I was very lucky back in the day. So we're past, Phil, we were joking, right? We're past statute of limitations. So let's just say back in the day, late 20-year-old Rob got into the construction industry and was as green as a greenhorn can get for people that understand that concept. And so I was told, you have to go get an OSHA 500, which I was immediately asking the person, a what? Because I had no clue. So I get signed up. I show up in Nashville, Tennessee, and this is where I get to meet Philip's parents. I get to meet his mom and his stepfather at an OSHA 500, and they were sizing me up. And let's just say they could tell I was green. And shortly thereafter, I met Philip, and we have known each other many moons. We've done lots of adventures, lots of different things. And honestly, I tried to sit under the learning tree from Philip a lot because, you know, in our kind of different paths of our careers, the side that Philip, you've gone down on that human performance side, or really looking at how to understand what's going on inside the mind of a worker, man, my hat's always off to you. I always sit in a learning tree with you, with Mike, with Pam at all times, man. It's great to be here with you today.
Good. No, we've had good mentors.
Yeah. So Philip, you grew up with safety mentors though. Like
I did.
that's even more unique because I mean safety is relatively new in construction, at least the new way of doing safety or the evolution of safety. But you grew up with it. I think Rob, you said you met Philip's parents in 2002, was it?
Correct.
So Philip, you like what was that like? Was that a natural progression to move into this space
Not
or
at all. I
did
had no plans to do this. No.
did you grow up every day you had to do a PTP before you went to
No,
school?
there was no PTP. So, my mother, before the term safety professional even existed, my mom was a safety nurse. And
Mm,
so she worked in nuclear power. It was Hanford Nuclear Plant there in Washington, Eastern Washington.
interesting.
And she was a nurse that got a job because her dad and her uncles and her grandfather all worked at the same nuclear plant, and so she ended up working there as a safety nurse. And back then, the idea of safety was to patch people up to put them back to
Right,
work, and then
right.
that evolved into OSHA rules and that kind of stuff. So there was no PTP or JSA or anything like that. It was just getting people back to work, but that kind of evolved. So we didn't talk about it a whole lot growing up. Grandpa and they would talk about doing construction, things that went on, but it wasn't really safety focused. And I had no desire to get into. I wanted to be a rock star, but the job was either poor or rich, and I was always going down the poor path.
So does that mean you play music? You were in a
Uh,
band for a
yeah,
while,
well, I mean, yes,
or
and
still am?
no,
Still
I'm
are?
not. I got kids to take care of now, so I don't play in bands or anything. But yeah, I drank my pay right at the bar and all that, so walked away with nothing. I hated working for the man, and had some odd jobs. Worked in factories, had some residential, light commercial construction jobs. No safety at all. And I think the first exposure to even OSHA was working in a factory, and they were treating me terrible, and over some respiratory issues. And my mom called OSHA. No, they all hated me for that.
Oh, yeah, I could only imagine.
But the guy at the time, and the boss was terrible, but he didn't know any better. It wasn't really his fault. He did what he thought was right, and ended up leaving that job,
How
and
old were you at that time?
oh geez,
Rough.
24, 25, something like that. So I was still young, had no clue what I wanted to do in life. But the music thing, I wanted to make a difference in the world, and it was such a weird thing that the safety career became that answer to that question of making a difference, and green all starting out. But had about a year of doing this painting business, doing some light commercial residential painting because it was the easiest construction job. And then Mike started ProSafe. I knew a little bit about money and accounting, and they gave me some admin jobs, and knew nothing about safety, but they mentored me through ProSafe. And the next thing you know, 24 years later, never left.
So was there a connection with ProSafe and your parents? Is that the
Yeah,
company?
so uh, d- mom and Mike were working for an insurance carrier that they hated, and was really limiting the higher level stuff that they wanted to do. And um, Mike said he wanted to try starting his own company, and mom said, "I'll give you 6 months." And I'll keep working at the insurance carrier to pay the bills, and we'll see where you're at in 6 months. 6 months later, my mom and I were both working for Mike at
Wow.
ProSafe. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. That's
Yeah.
pretty cool. And even then, I mean, that's a decent time ago.
Yeah,
Safety was very different.
it
Was
was.
it like, I mean, even today, I always say probably 50%. If you look at holistically the construction industry, 50% of construction companies are doing nothing in safety. They just have nothing and aren't doing
Yeah.
anything.
Right.
What was that like at that time? What was the focus? I mean, today's safety is a very
I
different
didn't
focus.
know anything at the time. And I was still trying to study OSHA regulations and figure out all that. So it kind of started with doing safety audits where you went to some company and they quote unquote couldn't afford a safety person. So you would keep them out of trouble. You'd go visit the job and do a report for management that showed everything that was wrong safety wise. And you'd show up next month, do it again, same stuff was there. But so I mean the job, I mean, looking back, if I knew then what I know now, I probably would have done things differently, but we all say that. But the blessing was that my mom and Mike were the type to read a lot and study a lot on advanced safety management concepts, even before we were talking about human performance. Behavior-based safety was kind of popular at the time. And so they were just great mentors that they were always saying, hey, look, you need to know this in addition to all the OSHA stuff. But it took me 10 years, I think, to even grasp what those advanced concepts actually look like. But there was something else going on at the time that we had we were like the fourth tier subcontractor for Donald Rumsfeld had an accident reduction policy for the Navy at the time. And we ended up getting a contract for that to do culture assessment work. A-
Interesting.
and so that shaped me. And we had a few other clients we were doing that work with. And so on one hand, I'm immersing myself in how to spell OSHA, but on the other side, I would go out to companies and ask employees, what do you really think about how management manages safety here. And, hearing that, hearing the viewpoint of the front line for 24 years really shapes you. And you start seeing common themes, whether it's a contractor working on a Navy base or a chemical plant or some private construction company. They were saying a lot of the same things. And then getting exposed to human performance, it's like, hey, everything human performance about is addressing the same stuff all these guys are talking about. And so that was it was the greatest blessing that ever happened
What
to
were
me.
you finding was that trend that they were talking about? And was it the Navy that was really you said it transformed you, or is it just getting in the field started with the Navy?
Well, the Navy was focused not on Navy personnel, but contractors working on Navy bases were having a lot of incidents. And so the things that stood out, I mean, if I laser focused on one thing, it was the disconnect between management and workers in the field and them not talking to each other. Which a lot of it was the superior inferior complex. Management knows better, employees know nothing, and just it was the biggest joke in the world that I was paid to go ask a worker what they think about how they manage things and go tell management what they said,
Isn't that, yeah, it's the
or go talk
topic
to them.
bridging the gap has been
Yeah,
around forever, right?
right. Yeah,
Bridging the gap most of the time is just going and talking to somebody, getting
that's
on
right.
site and talking to the people that are doing 80% of the work in the industry, the
Sure.
field trade workers.
But
And so
there's a
what
lot to that too. I mean,
yeah.
there's a lack of I'll say awareness, emotional intelligence. Maybe it's upbringing and modeling leadership skills that don't work. I mean, there's a lot to
I
that.
think it's fear too. I mean, there's a big difference
Yeah,
between an academic mindset and more of a hands-on learning cultural mindset. Like
sure.
when you're not in the field, and I grew up in the field. I started as a laborer in construction and grew up that way. But even as I moved more to the office, you get more disconnected and you get more uncomfortable when you get on site. A construction job site is chaotic. It is uncomfortable for, especially if you grow up in a classroom setting and then go to an office environment. It is very different. It
That's
is
very
rough,
true.
it is raw, it is real. There is no politics on site. It is get your job done and tell me why you can't, and no bullshit.
Right.
Um, and so that's how they like to be communicated though, to it not, hey, like, and that's where safety is interesting because the way that safety is introduced is through an academic process a lot of the times where it's this compliance-based safety where it's, hey, you got to do all these forms, all these things. When I first introduced that to the company I was running, we had hard hats, PPE based safety before, and then all of a sudden it shifted to prove you have a safety program, prove they're following it.
Right.
For starters, you had 55-year-old workers and, all the way down to 20-year-olds. But the 55-year-olds hadn't filled out a form, paper form, forget
Right.
safety, in
Right.
20 years.
Some couldn't
And so,
read.
some can't, no, and or
Right.
English second language or
Yeah.
spelling. I can't spell. I still can't
Yeah.
spell well. And so
Yeah.
the insecurity around filling out a form, especially if you're a manager, is embarrassing, right? And so you'll avoid it. But every single person initially thought to themselves, "Oh, we have to do another thing just to protect the business." They
That
don't,
still goes on.
right? And human beings need a connection to themselves. They need to be able to feel like they're pulling value out to themselves. And if they don't feel that value and if they can't transcend that exercise to value to themselves, you're always going to get, just that, okay, what can I do to get through this, past this, to get to the next thing? I'll do it
Yeah.
as fast and as easy as possible.
That's right. Change
Um,
the dates of the names and resubmit
Change
the
the dates of
form.
the
Yeah.
names, resubmit the form, zero
Yeah.
complacency disruption there.
Right.
Question for you though.
Yeah.
I'm interested on this. Compliance-based safety versus performance-based safety. I know that's something that you're big on. Before we get into what your view is on that, like the difference between the two, was there more compliance-based safety back when you first started in the industry and started to understand safety than there is now? Or is there more compliance-based safety now than there was before?
Oh, geez. Okay, so there's a both are true to everything. There's still a lot of compliance-based safety. We've loaded people down, I think, with more paperwork, be it a digital form on an iPad or a piece of paper, we give people even more compliance rules today than I think we did 20 years ago. But there are also pockets of higher level understanding going on as well at the same time. So there's definitely a both are true there.
Yeah, it's interesting when I found that compliance. So before we were, I don't know, I ran for the people that don't know, I ran a window installation company in high rises for many years. We had about 100 employees, and whenever you talk to companies in construction, it's not from the outside looking in, you'd be like, how can they possibly do this? How are they that bad of people where they don't care about their workers? And
Right.
it's not people don't care; they just don't know what you don't know. I cared so much about our workers' safety. I didn't know any different. I started in the industry where I started working on a swing stage, replacing glass with no fall protection training, no swing stage training, just because that's not what you did. You just went and got your job done. And it wasn't, somebody showed me how to, do it safely. I wore fall protection, but you just don't know what you don't know. And so what I found was the compliance enforcement for our business actually started to trigger me to understand safety at a higher level and unlocked my ability to actually shift to more of the perform and well whether it's performance based safety or just shift the mindset and start experimenting with how do we actually keep our workers safer and through that process of keeping them safer protect the business. But
100%.
I'm curious on your perspective on that, on the
Yeah.
differentiation between the two, and like what are your thoughts?
So, it was interesting how you said the word care. Do organizations not care about people's safety? I don't think any decent manager wants their people to die. And I've seen great examples of care where there is a tight knit family in construction. I've seen all kinds of times that somebody's suffering in some way, whether they the first one that popped in my brain was a guy whose daughter suffered some kind of medical condition, and the outpouring of subcontractors coming to rebuild his house for free to make life easier for his daughter. Now, at the same time, I think all those subcontractors thought that guy was an asshole from a safety management, leadership, influence standpoint, but they overlooked all that crap when it came to taking care of his daughter. And so there's that care exists. It's just there's misinterpretations, I think, of why people aren't being safe or what good safety looks like. But the other thing you mentioned about the stepping stone, I make the comparison all the time that it's kind of like we were in that crime and punishment era of safety, which was very much like Old Testament thinking. Hey,
Right.
we should stop killing our neighbor and sleeping with his wife. Okay,
Right.
that's a great idea. Let's have like 10 little commandments here. Stop killing your neighbor, stop cheating on your wife. But and we need those stepping stones for barbarism, which is what construction evolved from. It was barbarism. There are fistfights every day that I'm sure Rob
Yeah,
remembers.
I remember that being on site.
But we're of and so that stepping stone is necessary, but now we're in that more New Testament era of, if I thought about sleeping with somebody else in my mind, I've pretty much already committed adultery. And so are we evolving? Can we turn the other cheek a little bit? What is my part in this? It is a stepping stone and that's necessary in the evolution.
Well, I find too, I mean, human nature is if there isn't pain, nothing will progress and nothing will get
Amen.
solved.
Yes.
So when you start creating the pain around safety, you start creating the mindset of how do we solve this? How do we solve this in a different way? How do we evolve? How does safety actually impact businesses? And the way safety is now being talked about in businesses is something that I never thought, even in the last 6 years. I started Salus almost 7 years ago, to January of 2018. Before that, no safety background, right? No software background even, but I was a worker and then evolved to a manager, and things have just changed so much um, through that process. Um, but yeah, Rob, sorry, we've been taking up all the chat here, but
It's all good. It's flowing perfectly. You mentioned the word pain. And Philip, I'm curious, we talk about pain and nothing happens until you experience the pain. A lot of people refer to rules as pains,
Right.
usually pains in a particular body part. What is your thoughts on where do rules, because we're talking about we had the Old Testament rules, now we got the New Testament rules. Where do they really fail us in preventing the nature of this dangerous industry?
So rules, if we're talking about rules in the context of like legal rules with OSHA, those are always so far behind. What was it? We got some new rule from OSHA that PPE should fit you. Oh, well, no shit, right? And why do I need a rule that, hey, when you give people PPE, it should fit? And now there's some 200-page document and all about a simple rule and how much taxpayer money has been spent on that. Well, rules are good when you have people who do not care that would kill construction workers if we didn't have a rule. Rules are great for
Right.
that, right? But if we have genuine managers and leaders out there trying to have great performance, rules aren't always going to fit every context of doing the unique nature of construction. We're going to get new technology to do construction, and people are going to get hurt. And really, that's a gift, right? Every time somebody gets hurt, it's a gift. And what I don't mean is that we can't mourn the dead. We definitely want to mourn the dead. But what better way to honor the dead or the injured than to learn from that pain of how we can get better for the next people that haven't even been born yet? And OSHA's just way too slow with that. It's going to take decades for them to come up with a rule. Can we learn where a rule doesn't fit the context of doing work, where a rule's a good idea, and where we can have flexibility within a frame for rules?
Well, and I think rules, you'll always, if it's based on enforcement around law or rules, you'll always do the bare minimum to comply with that rule. And until somebody has that pain or takes that on themselves, they won't go above and beyond that, right? So
Right.
now you're seeing people take that, like you said, it's hard to say it's a gift. It's the first time I've heard somebody say it like that, which I agree. We had an incident that drove us. That's why Salus exists today, is because we had an incident on site where we almost killed someone. When you look back, it is a gift because
It's a
you use
gift.
that failure to elevate yourself and push yourself forward further faster. But it is such a
It's an emotional event too, right?
right.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
messes with
yeah.
your head to be like, that's a gift. But you're right. And so until somebody can connect to that and feel that,
Right.
they won't go above and beyond, right? Unfortunately, like if I never had that incident, well, Salus probably wouldn't have been started, right? What would we have been doing in safety at the company we're at if we didn't have this connection to a failure that pushed us to go further than just the regulatory side of it, which you can always skirt that. You can always do, oh
We'll
yeah, I don't
talk about
text and
that.
drive unless I'm at a stoplight,
Right.
right?
Well, so part of that there, I think, and Rob and I have had plenty of private conversations outside even the work stuff, that some of our great evolutions as human beings all started laying in the floor suffering. Okay. And so, yes, those pain points trigger the need for change. But I think I'm going to call it safety wisdom or organizational wisdom, if that even works better, because all these concepts apply to profit and production and quality too. That you get to a point that, okay, it's not just about what's the bare minimum. I want to be great. I want to constantly search out what is the best thing I can do for my organization, my people, and is that an organizational system that requires more than compliance with the rule, but are you required to grow personally and yeah, as a leader and grow your organization? What's the next greatest thing, right? Which is, Gabe, part of your model is I want a business that can help improve things before we're hurting, right? And so is there accountability within an organization that requires personal growth of leaders instead of just trying to skirt by the bare minimum? to stay out of trouble. But the unwise start there. But when we start becoming wise, I want to grow even when I don't need to. And is it an
How
organizational requirement?
so I like where the I want to pull on this a little bit.
Okay.
So what I've found in my not as depth of experience around health and safety as the two of you, but what I have found is that there's an evolution of new leaders. Yes, maybe they have a better understanding of health and safety, maybe not. But if you go back 10, 15 years ago, those people were still, a lot of them were still in a management role or getting into a management role or had been in a management role if you go to the older generation for 20 years even before that. But they weren't doing health and safety, a lot of them. Some
Right.
maybe were, but some were not. And so when you say wisdom, they had wisdom. They are that mindset of people that want to continuously push forward and do better and do more. But that trigger hadn't set in. The catalyst for them to shift their thinking and say, "Oh, my wisdom, like I'm now introducing the safety side of this, and I'm going to now, once that sparks, you can't stop them. All of a sudden, they're taking their company to the next level, learning more and more about safety. All of a sudden, 10 years later, safety is the catalyst of the culture that powers their business. But what is the trigger that shifts that you've seen that actually is the aha moment? Is it unfortunately an incident that happens? Do we actually need every single company to have an incident? Or is it something more that people are not just going through the motions of, oh, well, I need to beat my competitor. My competitor is now doing safety. I'm losing jobs because I don't have safety. Is there like, what's
There,
that trigger to create the
yeah,
wisdom?
everybody wants the magic bullet. If so, I'll start with in 24 years of doing this. Most of the time, when a culture makes leaps and bounds, it is due to the significant emotional event. Either some major OSHA fine, insurance carrier drops them, somebody dies, loses a major client, something like that. But it's also true that it appears that companies that have leadership at the top that has a high level of emotional intelligence can make those leaps without the significant emotional event. And so inside of that, where is the emotional intelligence? And I know that word, it sounds all fluffy and all, but where's the accountability for leaders developing their leadership skill set? Because that's where people get introduced to things like generational bias or how to talk to people, how to engage, all those kinds of things. And it's really not just a safety thing. I think, I was looking at some Gallup thing about a year ago about how it's harder for companies to keep people than hire them today. Engagement is down. People don't stay in the company for 20 years to get the Rolex watch. But the reason they're leaving is because there's no path there in development. There's
Yeah.
nepotism and who you know. But when people feel I can grow in this organization, and part of that is an organizational system that shows how to move up the org chart, what the specific path is. We will value your ideas for improving things, whether it's quality, safety, insert, whatever. If we don't have that structure in place, then maybe you'll get lucky and have a significant emotional event that changes things. But I've also seen where people have had significant emotional events, felt sad and all that stuff, and then moved on 6 months later,
Right.
and didn't improve. So,
Right. Yeah, I think I mean that touches on a huge issue in the industry of construction around just the labor shortage, right? I mean, it's not just that people are moving from one job to another. I mean, human beings we are a growth species. We have to be constantly growing. People
yes.
say, "Oh, we're addicted to money," whatever. We associate money with growth.
Right, right.
But we always have to be growing, and what we get is never enough, right? It's the next thing, it's the next thing, it's the next thing. And so how do you create that environment, right? In construction, it can be a tremendous growth opportunity. It's not advertised at that as that.
Mhm.
You go into construction at the field level, a lot of times this is speaking from my experience.
Sure.
It feels like you failed before you started coming out of high school. It
Yeah.
feels like I'm not academic enough, couldn't go to college or university, going into construction, I'm failing. Not a failure at all. The
Right.
growth that you can have through that is a tremendous. But the problem is twofold. One is that people aren't feeling that pathway. They don't have that mentorship. It's still leaning towards the academic growth side where, hey, you want to get out of the field? Go to school.
Right.
People in construction, predominantly at the field, do not learn through academic processes. We're some of the
Sure.
smartest people in the world, but we don't learn that way. So the problem with that is they don't see that trajectory. The work in the field is hard. You're working on a construction site. Imagine an office that has 300 people in it and no HR. You have
Right.
300 people in a construction site, no HR. You feel like you're just in Groundhog Day. And so the catalyst of that is actually even worse than what we're describing right now. They're telling their children, do not come into this industry.
Right.
Right? So now you're just relying on first generational construction workers, whether they come from other countries, which is no problem with that, or it's first time, in the family going to construction because they're telling their kids not to. So even if it's a family from out of another country immigrating to North America, they're telling their children not to go into construction, right? So there has to be this shift. And what you see is what you're describing. I'd love to get into how the human performance side of this combined with safety, how I believe that part, it can be not all of it, but a huge part of how do you actually feel. And it goes back to how does somebody feel like they're getting value and growth? As human beings, we want value and growth. That can be done in construction. But what's your view on just the human performance side, how that impacts safety, does it tie to the conversation I'm having right or introducing here or
Yeah, so some of that. We've always had a history of immigrants doing construction. It was the Irish one day. Maybe it's South America today, but there's always been that kind of thing. It's also true that we kind of go back several decades. Go to college, and now we're seeing a lot of people with degrees that have nothing to do with safety. Rob's a perfect example, and but it also had everything to do with it, right? But I still see a lot of day-to-day conversations with people that, hey, you can go to tech school and be a welder and make a lot of dang money in construction.
100%? Yeah.
Right. And so I don't know. It seems like we're seeing a little shift there. But to how it connects with human performance, can we understand the human brain and how it works at work? From something simple like where people are most likely to make a mistake, not an intentional safety deviation, but a mistake, which is the majority of all safety incidents we have. They're not purposeful, they're mistakes. But then also part of human performance is positively reinforcing the good things that people do. We give people rules what you shouldn't do, but what is the right thing to do instead, that component's missing a lot. And how is leadership held accountable for safety? And I'm not talking about, the recordable incident rate or something like that that's statistically invalid. I'm talking about how are you held accountable to engage your workers? And if I'm some foreman that really is taught, developed how to engage workers, how to get good performance, understand where errors are likely to occur, I'm going to be productive. I'm going to have good quality. I'm going to have better safety, and I'm going to get promoted. I'll be a superintendent one day. I'll be a division manager one day. But where is that organizational system for development and all those concepts? I mean, you can easily make well over six figures in construction, but we got to lay out the organizational path for all of that.
Totally agree. I don't think that construction is any different than any other business. I mean, you don't have in a business all managers
Right.
anymore. You have look, our company, we have software developers, we have sales, we have people that just are on junior sales that are just calling or going boots on the ground every day. And that's no different, but every single one of them want to have a career path. And not all of that is to management, right?
True.
Individual contributors are just as effective and important in a business as a
Yeah.
manager. It's your personality, it's where you want, where do you pull value from. And that's no different than in the field of construction. You could have an incredible carpenter that doesn't want to become a manager, but is one of the best carpenters you've ever seen
Right.
that will be an incredible mentor, right? And should be sitting at the same level as far as respect in a business as a director or a senior manager, a foreman or a superintendent type thing, right?
Right.
And so that's, I think there's an evolution that has to happen around that
I want to
in the
touch
way.
on that, Gabe, because this you sparked a thought. There was oh, it was this delivery company and delivering aggregate and stuff like that, and one of the old guys said, "I don't want to be a corporate trainer in those classrooms and all that. Let the safety person do all that kind of stuff. But I would love to mentor all these new drivers we have after they go to the class, let them ride around with me in the concrete truck and let me show them the ropes of what the real world is like." And so you're right. There are people that don't want the management path, but it's also true. Are we taking advantages of those resources that exist in our organization we don't even know about, which is tied back to, are my leaders that listed on the org chart, are they going out there and held accountable for engaging that guy I'm talking about to learn the value that already exists in the organization, right? And so, yeah, what does that path look like? That's what a lot of people, whether it's becoming a manager or just like you said, somebody who just wants to be a mentor, everybody wants to feel purpose at a certain age. That purpose looks different for sure. But where's the organizational system to tap into that? Because if that guy doesn't feel purpose there, he's probably going to leave the organization. Great guy, right? He's going to leave to somebody else and for a buck an hour raise or something, when we could take advantage of that. He'd feel purpose and we could use that.
Totally agree. Or you're going to burn them out. I mean, so
Yeah.
often I saw the best of our individual contributors in construction, 55, 60 years old, still doing the work that they were doing at 20.
Sure.
That's not acceptable. Like they shouldn't have to be doing that. They
Right.
should be the ones mentoring, being there, making their knowledge is key. In construction, the biggest fear is the knowledge gap. A superintendent, it takes them 20 years to become a superintendent because it's 20 years of failures and growth from learning
Right.
that you can put them in a situation. AI can't do this. No
Right.
computer can do this. They can be in a situation and see 17 different things coming together and tell you what's going to fail 5 years from now, not what's going to fail now or a week from now. And so if we don't get that mentorship and get them to want to stay from 45, 50 years old to 65 years old in the industry, because you know what? It's not, it's a different job than what they did before. They're a master carpenter, but that doesn't mean that they're hammering nails and lugging 2x4s around, pushing up walls every day. Right.
Right.
Well,
Well,
love
you
this
just said
conversation.
something. So I was doing a culture assessment one time, and general contractor superintendent, he said, when we're in between jobs, like when you finish a job as a superintendent, they send you to another project to go assist that superintendent, where they should take us to the office when they're estimating and bidding these jobs, because I can tell them what's going to go wrong. And
100%. Yeah.
everything you just said, but why do we not do that? Again, it's a lack of awareness, and part of it's tied to, I'm higher than you and I'm going to put you over here like a little cog, instead of tapping into what people already know,
And
which
the
comes back
progression
to,
plan.
yeah, where's the engagement? Where's the
Yeah.
engagement with that?
Yeah, totally.
Hey, Philip, one thing I wanted to throw out there, you also talk a lot about these concepts on your podcast. We didn't really tap into that yet in your origin story. Can you share a little bit about the podcast that you run, and what is it that you're trying to share through that podcast to help people understand some of these ideas, these new ideas?
The point of that is, and you said it, Rob, here we're 24 years later, and there's a lot of I'll leave the names out, but there's a lot of clients out there, owners and that kind of thing, that say, I need somebody with a 500 on my job site. You're not blessed as a safety person until you've had 2 weeks of training and now you're blessed. And a lot of those people, they don't have corporate giving them exposure to higher level advanced safety management training, human performance, all that kind of stuff. And I just wanted to help them, right? That, hey, here's some small doses of little topics if it helps you be successful as a safety person. There's some that they'll give you a nice budget and send you to the fancy classes, but a lot of people don't get that and wanted them to have some opportunity for learning that.
Now, what's the name of your podcast
Yeah,
again? Where
Leader
can people
Think.
find
Yeah,
you?
it's leaderthink.com, or you search Leader Think on, all the major Spotify, Apple stuff.
Right
Yeah.
on, man. Thank you so much for joining us today and
Yeah.
sharing your experience, these nuggets of wisdom. I hope people are really going to get a lot out of the talk track where you're talking about how to move past this compliance-based mentality, man. So, Philip, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks,
you,
Philip. That was a
guys.
great conversation.
Appreciate what you're doing, Gabe and Rob.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Frontline Focus podcast, powered by Salus. If you enjoyed this episode, then please subscribe to our show on Apple Podcast or Spotify, or better yet, leave us a comment on social media for us to hear your thoughts about this conversation. Until next time, keep moving safety forward.